The Biden Doctrine, Leadership Without Hegemony. The Biden Doctrine marks a nuanced shift in American foreign policy, characterized by a strategic reorientation from military dominance to a blend of diplomacy reinforced by strength. While history will ultimately judge the full impact of Joe Biden's one-term presidency, it is clear that his administration has navigated a complex global landscape with both notable successes and strategic missteps. Under Biden's leadership, the United States has embarked on a deliberate course to rebuild trust with international allies, reinvigorate multilateral institutions, and establish a robust American presence in Asia. This new direction signifies a departure from the previous era's over-reliance on military interventions, favoring a more balanced approach that leverages diplomacy while maintaining a credible military deterrent. A significant achievement of this tenure was the withdrawal from Afghanistan, ending the longest of America's forever wars and signaling a shift away from prolonged military engagements. However, Biden's foreign policy has not been without its challenges. The administration has faced significant geopolitical threats, notably from China and Russia, two great powers united in their ambition to challenge U.S. primacy. The Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022 tested Biden's diplomatic and strategic acumen. His response has been marked by a blend of traditional statecraft and innovative measures, demonstrating a keen understanding of global dynamics and a willingness to adapt. In addressing China, Biden's strategy reflects a mix of continuity and change from the previous administration. While his approach has at times mirrored Trump's confrontational stance, it has also introduced a fresh emphasis on forging new alliances and reinforcing existing ones across Asia. This strategy aims to recalibrate U.S. engagement in the region, effectively achieving the long-desired pivot to Asia without explicitly invoking the term. In contrast, Biden's handling of the Middle East has been more contentious. His decisive action in Afghanistan stands in stark contrast to his cautious approach to the conflict in Gaza. His administration's reluctance to challenge Israeli policies and exert meaningful pressure on its leadership reflects a more traditional, and perhaps outdated, perspective on the region. This has led to criticisms that Biden's approach in the Middle East lacks the boldness and innovation seen elsewhere in his foreign policy. Overall, the Biden Doctrine represents a complex and evolving strategy of leadership without hegemony, balancing diplomatic engagement with a commitment to maintaining global influence. In a nation as politically fragmented as the United States, the span of just 4 years may seem too brief to forge a lasting foreign policy doctrine. The achievements of Joe Biden's presidency could potentially be undone by a future administration, leaving his legacy in flux. Nonetheless, Biden's tenure offers a glimpse of a new paradigm in international relations, one that resonates with the complexities of the contemporary world. At the heart of this emerging doctrine is a deliberate departure from the pursuit of wars aimed at transforming other nations. Biden's strategy has emphasized the reinvigoration of diplomacy as the cornerstone of American foreign policy. This revival of diplomacy marks a significant shift from the era of unipolar dominance that defined the post-Cold War period, signaling an intention to engage globally without resorting to military intervention or the trappings of hegemony. Yet, this diplomatic resurgence is not without its shortcomings. The administration's approach has struggled to produce a coherent global economic strategy and has fallen short in its commitment to non-proliferation and arms control. These gaps reveal the challenges of navigating a new foreign policy landscape, where balancing global engagement with strategic restraint remains a delicate task. Despite these imperfections, Biden's legacy so far has showcased the United States' ability to engage profoundly with the world while shedding the hubris of its past unipolar dominance. This approach reflects a nuanced understanding of global dynamics, striving to redefine America's role on the world stage not through force, but through renewed diplomatic efforts and strategic alliances. Biden's world, restoring trust and rebuilding alliances. Upon taking office, Joe Biden faced a monumental challenge, restoring America's credibility on the global stage. His campaign mantra, "America is back," promised a revival of U.S. leadership and a return to its preeminence. However, once ensconced in the White House, Biden quickly recognized that both the power of the U.S. and its global influence had been considerably diminished. The administration's focus shifted from merely projecting strength to demonstrating that the era of Trump's America First policies, marked by disdain for NATO, rejection of multilateralism, and a cavalier approach to climate change and pandemics, was over. Restoring trust was no small feat. Even friendly nations were wary, knowing that the next election might bring a leader with similar isolationist views. To underscore a new era, Biden took immediate action on his first day in office, rejoining the World Health Organization and the Paris Agreement on climate change, two key international commitments abandoned by Trump. This symbolic and practical shift signaled a renewed American commitment to global cooperation and was quickly followed by tangible measures to reaffirm the country's role in various international agreements and organizations. A significant achievement was the revitalization of NATO. Under Biden's leadership, the number of NATO members meeting the defense spending benchmark of at least 2% of GDP surged from 9 to 23, with others expected to follow. The historic inclusion of Sweden and Finland, abandoning their long-standing neutrality to join the alliance, marked a strategic expansion. The enhanced readiness and increased deployments near Russia's borders have significantly strengthened NATO's collective security. In Asia, Biden's administration embarked on an ambitious diplomatic strategy to counterbalance China's rising influence. This approach moved beyond the traditional hub-and-spokes model, which depicted the U.S. at the center with allies radiating outward. Instead, Biden's vision materialized as a dynamic latticework of relationships, creating a complex network of alliances and partnerships. The elevation of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, Quad, comprising Australia, India, Japan, and the United States from a ministerial forum to a summit of heads of state exemplifies this shift. Additionally, the creation of a UK-US, a security pact involving Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, aimed to enhance deterrence in the Pacific through the development of an Australian nuclear-powered submarine fleet. Biden's diplomatic efforts also included a series of trilateral and bilateral summits, strengthening ties with Japan, the Philippines, and South Korea, as well as expanding U.S. military access in Australia, Japan, Papua New Guinea, and the Philippines. The U.S. deepened its engagement with key regional players such as India, Indonesia, and Vietnam, while hosting the first-ever summit of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, in Washington. These strategic moves reflect an extraordinary level of diplomatic activity and achievement in less than 4 years. Biden's administration has not only re-established critical alliances and forged new ones but has also laid the groundwork for enduring partnerships designed to outlast any single administration's tenure. This ambitious and multifaceted approach underscores a new chapter in American foreign policy, characterized by renewed engagement and strategic depth in an increasingly complex global landscape. For over 20 years, U.S. leaders have consistently emphasized the significance of Asia in the 21st century, advocating for a strategic pivot to reflect this reality. Yet, translating these declarations into concrete policy has proven elusive. The George W. Bush administration's focus on the global war on terror overshadowed any serious engagement with Asia. The Obama administration acknowledged the need for a stronger strategic presence but fell short in delivering it. The Trump administration's skepticism towards alliances further eroded American influence in the region. It was under the Biden administration that the long-discussed pivot to Asia finally gained substantial traction. Biden's team not only articulated the importance of Asia but actively redefined U.S. foreign policy to reflect this new priority. This marked a significant departure from previous administrations' limitations, as Biden's approach transformed rhetoric into actionable strategy. The administration's efforts to deepen ties and build a robust network of alliances across Asia represent a pivotal shift, making the long-promised pivot a tangible reality. A lost cause, the Afghanistan quandary. To chart a new course for the United States, President Biden faced the monumental task of ending the longest forever war of the post-9/11 era. By the time he assumed office, the U.S. had spent 2 decades in Afghanistan, with a staggering cost exceeding $2 trillion, equivalent to $300 million a day. The strategy had oscillated between counterterrorism and counterinsurgency, shifting from a low-profile approach relying on special forces and air power to deploying a massive 100, 000 strong troop presence. Efforts ranged from cultivating a stable Afghan government to addressing its endemic corruption. Despite various initiatives aimed at creating a national police force, building an army, and improving education for women and girls, the results remained frustratingly elusive. When Biden took office, U.S. intelligence revealed a troubling reality: the Taliban's influence had been expanding steadily, a fact largely unknown or underappreciated by the American public. In his August 2021 address, Biden confronted this reality head-on. He questioned the vital national interest in continuing the conflict and provided a candid assessment: "We have only one, to ensure Afghanistan can never again be used to launch attacks on our homeland." With the defeat of al-Qaeda and the death of Osama bin Laden in 2011, he argued that the primary objective had been met, but the U.S. had remained entangled for another decade. The swift and chaotic collapse of the Afghan government and army, the Taliban's rapid takeover, and the ensuing panic in Kabul, marked by the tragic deaths of 13 U.S. service members and over 160 Afghan civilians in a suicide bombing, fueled intense criticism of the withdrawal decision. Richard Haass, then President of the Council on Foreign Relations, expressed frustration on Twitter, lamenting the loss of a fragile equilibrium at a low sustainable cost. However, this perceived stability was an illusion, maintained by a temporary cessation of attacks on U.S. forces while the Taliban awaited the withdrawal agreement negotiated by the Trump administration. Had the U.S. remained, the cost in American lives would have likely resumed, exposing the true price of continued involvement. Biden's decision to withdraw, though controversial and fraught with chaos, was rooted in the recognition that the war's costs had become untenable and its benefits increasingly dubious. The episode underscored the stark reality that, despite significant investments, the quest for a stable Afghanistan was ultimately a lost cause, driven by shifting goals and persistent challenges. The stark reality is that by August 2021, the United States had already lost the war in Afghanistan long before the final chaotic scenes of withdrawal. The nature of defeat is often difficult to fully grasp, especially when overshadowed by dramatic and immediate images. Prompted by former President Trump's rhetoric, many Americans fixated on the disorder at the end of the conflict, overshadowing years of mounting failures. The tragic deaths of 13 U.S. service members at the conclusion are mourned, yet the 2,461 American lives lost and 20,744 injured in previous years fade from memory. Biden's decision to withdraw was not a strategic blunder, rather, it was a recognition of the broader failure and the futility of further involvement. As Biden aptly noted in his speech, "There's nothing China or Russia would rather have than the United States bogged down another decade in Afghanistan." The collapse of the Kabul government was a misjudgment, but it was overshadowed by Biden's strategic insight into the benefits of ending the prolonged conflict. His decision represented a significant departure from a feudal era of military attempts to reshape nations. The Biden administration's resolve was soon tested anew when Russian President Vladimir Putin launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Biden had initially displayed diplomatic foresight by extending the New START Treaty, a key bilateral nuclear arms control agreement, in his first week in office. This gesture offered a glimpse of hope. However, as tensions escalated, the administration observed a troubling buildup of Russian troops and heavy weaponry at Ukraine's borders, raising alarm bells. "We're looking at it very carefully," 24/7 U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken assured, almost a year before the invasion began in February 2022. When the invasion commenced, Biden took a bold step by declassifying U.S. intelligence on Russian troop movements. This unprecedented transparency was intended to alert the world to Putin's plans and undermine Russian disinformation. As the conflict unfolded, Biden articulated a clear stance: no U.S. troops would be deployed to Ukraine. This firm commitment helped maintain public support for Ukraine without escalating the conflict directly. Biden's strategic approach involved mobilizing a coalition of European allies, NATO, and U.S. lawmakers to provide robust support for Ukraine. His administration carefully calibrated the flow of military aid, incrementally increasing the sophistication of weaponry in response to Russian aggression. This measured approach ensured that U.S. support remained effective without provoking a direct confrontation. In addition to material support, Biden leveraged U.S. military and intelligence expertise to bolster Ukraine's defense in less visible yet impactful ways. His leadership in the face of Russian aggression has demonstrated a nuanced understanding of strategic diplomacy, balancing direct aid with broader geopolitical considerations. Through these actions, Biden has navigated a complex crisis with a blend of transparency, strategic restraint, and steadfast support for Ukraine. Flashpoints. Despite the ongoing challenges and unanswered questions in his foreign policy, President Biden's approach has notably influenced global affairs. His handling of the Russian invasion of Ukraine has been widely recognized as a significant achievement, even though the path to peace remains elusive. Conversely, the administration's record on China and the Middle East reveals a more complex and contested legacy. In 2022, the Biden administration articulated a national security strategy identifying China as a primary strategic competitor, highlighting its growing influence and its partnership with Russia. The administration's response has been strategically astute, focusing on strengthening alliances and increasing U.S. military presence in Asia without resorting to inflammatory rhetoric. However, the situation with Taiwan has revealed deeper uncertainties. The One China policy, a delicate balance that has maintained peace across the Taiwan Strait for over 40 years, has been disrupted by Biden's public statements and the controversial visit of Speaker Nancy Pelosi in 2022. This visit, which Biden could have prevented, led to a dramatic increase in tensions and military responses from Beijing. The ambiguity surrounding U.S. policy toward Taiwan and its implications for future U.S.-China relations is a growing concern, as both sides grapple with escalating actions and reactions. In the Middle East, Biden aimed to shift focus from the region's perennial conflicts. The Trump administration's Abraham Accords had normalized relations between Israel and several Arab states, but Biden's attempt to extend these accords to Saudi Arabia was complicated by escalating Israeli settlement activity in the West Bank. The result was a significant escalation in Palestinian frustration, culminating in a devastating Hamas attack on October 7, 2023, the deadliest day in Israeli history. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan's remark that the region was quieter today than it has been in 2 decades proved to be overly optimistic and reflective of a disconnect from the rapidly changing realities on the ground. Biden's response to the attack, characterized by strong support for Israel, has been criticized for lacking a coherent strategy. While the administration has worked to broker a ceasefire, it has struggled to address the dire humanitarian crisis in Gaza and to use U.S. leverage to compel Israel to mitigate civilian casualties and pursue a sustainable peace plan. In summary, while Biden's administration has made strides in managing complex global dynamics, its handling of Taiwan and the Middle East underscores the ongoing challenges and limitations in American foreign policy. Nuclear neglect. While President Biden's foreign policy has made significant strides in some areas, his approach to economic protectionism and nuclear arms control reveals notable shortcomings. The extension of Trump-era trade tariffs, particularly on high-tech and clean energy products from China, marks a departure from the global free trade paradigm. Biden's tariffs, designed to curb China's technological ascent, have been implemented with precision, incorporating export bans, sanctions, and subsidies. Yet, tariffs' hidden taxes on consumers and businesses are inherently flawed. They inflame inflation, provoke retaliatory measures, and invite escalating trade wars. Biden's decision to quadruple tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles to 100%, followed by Trump's call for an increase to 200%, illustrates the dangers of such policies. The broader implication is a possible end to the era of globalization, echoing the protectionist mistakes of the 1930s, which contributed to global economic decline. More troubling is Biden's lack of focus on nuclear arms control, an area where he had previously championed significant reforms. The administration's approach to the Iran nuclear deal, or the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, exemplifies this neglect. Trump's 2018 withdrawal from the JCPOA left a vacuum that Biden struggled to fill. Initial efforts to engage Iran were marred by a tough stance that undermined negotiations, leading to the missed opportunity of restoring the deal. The administration's subsequent approach failed to offer a viable alternative, leaving the issue unresolved. Similarly, the AUKUS agreement, which involved transferring highly enriched nuclear fuel to Australia, set a dangerous precedent. This deal, aimed at enhancing Australia's naval capabilities, risks encouraging other countries to pursue nuclear weapons under the guise of civilian nuclear programs, potentially violating the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The Biden administration's handling of nuclear arms control reflects a broader trend of missed opportunities. Despite a reaffirmation in January 2022 by the 5 original nuclear powers that nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought, the threat landscape has worsened. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has been accompanied by aggressive nuclear posturing, including the suspension of the New START treaty, while China accelerates its nuclear arsenal expansion. The administration's modest efforts to negotiate a successor to New START and initiate talks with Beijing fall short of addressing these escalating threats. Moreover, the administration's ambitious modernization of U.S. nuclear forces, including land-based missiles, complicates the arms control landscape. These missiles, vulnerable to first strike attacks, risk destabilizing global security. A more prudent strategy might involve extending the life of existing Minuteman III missiles rather than investing over $150 billion in a new missile force. Biden's earlier advocacy for declaring deterrence as the sole purpose of nuclear weapons, emphasizing their role in preventing war rather than engaging in warfighting, was a significant policy shift that he chose not to pursue as president. This missed opportunity reflects the constraints imposed by current geopolitical realities, including the ongoing war in Ukraine and China's nuclear ambitions. The growing chorus for expanding the U.S. nuclear arsenal and resuming nuclear testing underscores the urgency of addressing these issues. With the U.S. having conducted over 1,000 tests, further testing offers little strategic value. However, legitimizing a return to nuclear testing could prompt other nations, particularly China, to escalate their own programs, marking a dangerous regression to the arms race era of the 1950s. The path forward requires a renewed commitment to arms control and a re-evaluation of policies that may inadvertently heighten global nuclear risks. America Redux. When President Biden took office, he faced the daunting task of unraveling the America First doctrine that had defined his predecessor's foreign policy. The challenge was not merely to correct a series of missteps but to reinvigorate U.S. leadership on the global stage, restoring predictability, rebuilding alliances, and re-establishing trust in American commitments. Biden's presidency began with a slim Democratic majority in Congress, a reality that soon evolved into a sharply polarized political environment, especially after Republicans took control of the House. This shift highlighted the difficulties of pursuing coherent foreign policy in an era where political calculation often overshadowed strategic foresight. From the outset, Biden grappled with the question of Russia's intentions in Ukraine, only to face the stark reality of large-scale aggression in Europe, a profound shift in international dynamics. Simultaneously, he had to navigate a relationship with China fraught with rising tensions, broken promises, and a communication void that hampered diplomatic efforts. Biden's foreign policy had to contend with several ill-fated promises. He had envisioned a world divided between autocracies and democracies, a simplistic dichotomy that failed to capture the complexity of global politics. His Summit for Democracy, intended to showcase democratic values, instead became a diplomatic quagmire, marred by contentious decisions over which nations should be included and resulting in a series of online meetings with modest outcomes. One of Biden's more contentious legacies has been his approach to economic policy. While he promised a foreign policy for the middle class, this pledge largely translated into domestic investments in manufacturing, education, healthcare, and debt reduction. On the global stage, however, it manifested as protectionist trade policies, a departure from free trade that may have long-term repercussions for both the U.S. and the world economy. Despite these challenges, Biden has succeeded in shifting the focus of U.S. foreign policy towards Asia. The relationships forged and strengthened in this region are a testament to effective diplomacy. Biden's administration has succeeded in establishing a more stable and constructive framework for engagement with China, even though Taiwan remains a persistent and unresolved source of tension. The growing network of partnerships, economic agreements, and military alliances in Asia underlines the potential of dedicated diplomatic efforts. Biden's tenure, therefore, represents a complex and evolving landscape of U.S. foreign policy. While not without its missteps and contested legacies, his presidency has demonstrated a commitment to reshaping American diplomacy in a manner that seeks to address contemporary challenges and seize new opportunities on the global stage. As President Biden's term unfolds, his legacy will inevitably be shaped by his handling of both long-standing and emerging challenges in U.S. foreign policy. Among the most critical aspects of his tenure is his approach to Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Regardless of whether a stable ceasefire in Gaza is achieved, Biden's presidency will be marked by his apparent difficulty in confronting the reality of Israel under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The Israel Biden once admired as a beacon of democracy has, under Netanyahu's leadership, evolved into a more illiberal and militaristic state. An Israeli strategy that involves long-term governance of Gaza and continued annexation of the West Bank could not only preclude the possibility of a viable two-state solution but also inflict severe military, financial, and reputational damage on Israel. This trajectory would represent a profound injustice to the Palestinian people, a reality that the U.S. cannot afford to ignore given its special relationship with Israel. Another cornerstone of Biden's presidency has been his commitment to ending America's longest war. For the first time in 25 years, U.S. forces are not engaged in sustained combat operations, marking a significant shift in American military involvement abroad. This achievement underscores Biden's recognition of the need for a more nuanced and realistic approach to global ambitions, taking into account current resources, political will, and partisan divisions. In a world grappling with existential challenges, Biden has demonstrated a strategic understanding of the importance of alliances and partnerships. His administration has embraced the value of multinational solutions and has reaffirmed the significance of democratic alliances. However, Biden has also learned that the world does not fit neatly into a binary division between democracies and autocracies. Many nations exist in a complex gray area, and framing U.S. foreign policy as a simplistic contest between these two poles often yields limited results. The global landscape remains in flux, making it difficult to foresee how Biden's presidency will be viewed in the context of historical change. Will U.S. and European voters lean towards populism, nationalism, or even isolationism? What are China's long-term intentions in the Pacific and beyond? Can the war in Ukraine be resolved without setting a dangerous precedent for aggression? Will major powers drive each other into a new nuclear arms race? And, crucially, will Biden's successor share his vision, or could a potential return of Trump reverse much of his work? Amidst these uncertainties and despite the deepening political polarization at home, Biden's presidency has been marked by profound shifts in foreign policy. These changes are not merely about managing American decline but are a reflection of the country's enduring strengths and its evolving role on the global stage.